Hello, Serious Survivor here. We see a lot about gear. We see a lot about, items we can purchase, things we can add to our bug out bags, things we can buy to make our homes safer, better if there's some type of scenario that knocks the power out, or even worse in some cases. And this is all good. I know myself, I have a lot of survival gear, more than I could ever carry with me should I have to bug out. But I have something else that is important and does trump the majority of my survival gear. Now, inflation's a thing of the past, right? But last month's inflation in the U.S. had the highest rise in 29 years. So with rising food and gas costs, it's an urgent problem if you're thinking about retiring soon. You need an inflation dam to stop your savings and assets from eroding in value. Noble Gold's expertise in retirement planning and IRAs means their team of specialists is your first stop. Call them about this month's offer of a 1-ounce American Eagle Pure Silver Proof Coin with an IRA. Call at 877-646-5347. But I have something else that is important and does trump the majority of my survival gear, and that's a plan. Multiple plans. Multiple plans to get out of the area, multiple plans to stay in the area, multiple plans to get from work to my home, and then plans to get from my home to my real home in South Carolina. Now, planning is the most time-consuming part of prepping, and that's why it is neglected by a lot of people. It's not a 5-minute job to sit down with a map and map out my routes to where I need to get to. It can turn into hours, days, and even weeks of research, driving to certain locations, checking out the neighborhoods. Are these paths feasible? Are these trails feasible? You're going to want to check out the areas physically if you're bugging out to somewhere that you've never been before. And I know that's probably a common situation for a lot of people. A lot of people who live in urban areas. The United States has almost 80% of its population in urban areas. And a lot of people in these areas will be forced to evacuate under certain types of, grid down, EMP, or other types of scenarios in which those areas become uninhabitable. And the real question you need to ask yourself is, what will I do to get out of the area? And that's where planning comes in. Having a plan to escape the area. And when we talk about planning to get out of an area, this is one of the most complicated situations because my plan is different than yours. Yours is different from the person that lives directly next door to you. And theirs is different from the person across the street. Nobody's plan will be the same unless you're working together in a group to survive. But the most important aspect of planning is redundancy. More than one. If I have one plan to get out of my area, I'm going to go this way and I'm going to get on this road and I'm going to cut through this area and then I'm going to get into the mountainous region or wherever I may be heading, then I'm setting myself up for failure. How often in life do we make a plan and maybe it does succeed, but it does not go exactly as we predicted? And it's pretty rare that a plan will follow every step that we lay out and everything will work as perfectly as we want it to. And in most situations, that's just simply not going to happen. So if we don't have redundancies in place or backup plans in place, then a lot of people will be left, well, what do I do now? My plan didn't work. I couldn't get out of the city because the roads were blocked or because the drawbridge was up or whatever the situation may be. And then people are stuck trying to formulate a new plan in the middle of a chaotic situation. The last thing you want is to try and develop plans after the event has occurred, because at this time is short, and WROL stands for without rule of law, and without rule of law will most likely kick in within the first 72 hours in most urban areas, and that's going to create a very dangerous situation when a grid down event does occur. Without a plan to escape that urban area, a lot of people will be trapped. Developing a plan is not hard, but it's not fast. It's not easy for someone who's never developed a plan to escape an area before to just sit down and do it in 5 minutes. It's not going to happen. This does require research of your area. This does require an understanding of your area. And this does require a destination. Some people will create a bug out plan and say that they're just going out to the woods. And that's fine if you can survive in the woods. And that's a real question. There are a lot of people that die on a yearly basis. Not a massive amount, but people die from exposure. People die from wild animal attacks. And this is something that people have to take into consideration If you're not an outdoors person, then there will be more issues you face than you probably realize at this point. There will be sickness, there will possibly be disease. If you can't hunt, fish, and identify edible plants and edible species of vegetation, then there will be starvation, there will be hunger. But as bad as it sounds, it is survivable. We can survive pretty much anything as long as we're not taken out in the initial event. And this boils down to your knowledge, your skills, and your plan. Don't formulate a plan to go simply in one direction. Pick 4 different locations. 1 location to the north, 1 to the east, to the south, and 1 to the west. And develop a plan that gets you from your primary location, your home, your primary location, to that eastern location. And develop at least 3 to 5 backup routes. It's going to require the use of multiple maps, but luckily these resources are available for free on the internet, and you can even print out most of these. But have a plan that can take you in any direction, because that's important. If I just plan to go in one direction, what if that direction is blocked? What if that direction is destroyed? Now I have no plan, and I've got to sit down and try and think of what I'm going to do without any resources. Planning is easier now that we have the internet, but when the grid is down or when the internet is down, you're not going to be able to formulate a plan to go into a different direction using those resources. So if you don't have the physical resources on hand, such as maps of the entire area and multiple maps, topography maps, city maps, street maps, highway maps, state maps, regional maps, if you don't have all these, it's going to be extremely difficult to plan where you're going to go when you don't even have a visual representation of where you're trying to get to. Set up multiple plans and break them into categories. What I do is I break them into categories. I have my plans that take me to the west. I have my plans that take me to the east, the ones that take me north, the ones that take me south. And in formulating these plans, some of the resources I use are online, and that's why it's so important to do it now. I use resources that tell me where the nuclear reactors are at so that I can mark them on the map. I use resources to tell me where warehouses are at, warehouses that may contain food, so I can mark them on the map. I also mark on the map areas of interest such as gas refineries, such as chemical plants, areas that I want to avoid if it is a grid down, because these could possibly be creating contamination at that point when the grid goes down. Also on my map, I will go out of the way to avoid the centers of towns, to avoid areas that I know are going to be heavily populated, and back roads are going to be your best option. But one of the disadvantages of back roads is usually these are going to be 2-lane roads, and this is going to give people with ill intentions the chance to set up roadblocks and to stop passage through these areas. And as crazy as that may sound, you do have to take that into account, because it will happen. So get a series of maps, and you can do it online for free right now. And at least one of the maps, don't write on every map you've got, because that's always a bad idea to write on all your maps. But set one aside that you can use to mark these different areas in, and mark off all the areas that would be dangerous. And these would be your power generation, nuclear power facilities. These would be your chemical plants, your manufacturing that you know uses caustic or acidic chemicals, and develop your plan from there. Develop a plan that takes you to the north, to the east, to the south, and to the west. 4 different plans, and this is also going to require 4 different locations. Now, if you own a bug out location, then your end goal is to make it to that location. Now, I'm not always going to be able to head, say, west to my bug out location, so if I don't have a plan that takes me north that can get me out of the area, and then I can circle back and head west and make it to my bug out location. So even if you have a centralized location, you can still plan to leave your general area in any direction. Another set of plans that are necessary are getting from work to your primary location. Living in an urban area, going a small distance, even 4, 5, or 10 miles, this can be very difficult if the grid were to suddenly go down due to anything, basically. This would be extremely difficult just due to the population density and how difficult it is to navigate through an urban environment with thousands or maybe a few million people, depending on where you live. So having a plan that gets you from your work or where you're going to be working at, your work location, to your home or your primary location is also going to be just as important as a bug out plan. Because if I can't make it home, I'm not going to be able to get home and get my supplies and get my family. Make sure that everyone in your family or your group understands these plans. Take time with them, and this is the hardest thing to do, especially with younger kids. And teenagers. It's hard to get people on board with sitting down and talking about how we're going to escape the city if there's a catastrophe. Nobody wants to talk about that. Most people will just blow it off like there's no need for this, nothing's ever going to happen. And maybe something doesn't happen, but so what? If I spend 2 or 3 days making a plan and nothing ever happens, I really haven't lost anything. But if I don't make that plan and something does happen, then I'm going to lose everything. But probably one of the most important plans that some people may forget about is, what are you going to do when you get to your bug out location? Okay, I bugged out, I reached this remote area in the wilderness, and I'm here. What do I do? And that is where planning tends to stop for a lot of people. Once you get there, then you've reached your goal. So does the plan end? No, that's the beginning of the next stage of the plan. And this is the part to where it's going to be different for every situation. And this is why it's so important to have multiple plans. Get a notebook, write these down in it, and prepare for every different scenario. If it's a scenario that's a grid down situation, and I believe that people are going to be evacuating the cities and there's a good possibility they're going to be heading through this area, then I need to consider defenses. And defenses are something that's very important even in a bug out location. And it can be a little harder to construct defenses in a bug out location than it is in a structured home. Research is key. Time. It takes time to develop these plans. The more you start planning, the more you'll realize, the more you're going to learn as you start doing this. When I started developing plans to get out of the area that I'm in now, I learned more about the area than I ever did before. And this is only beneficial knowledge. There's a lot of talk about gear out there, and gear is great. I have a ton of gear, and I think a lot of people have a ton of gear. I don't think there's a shortage of supply gear from prepping gear for people. Easy to get. Some of it's expensive, but there's usually a reasonable option if you search around enough. But gear is extremely important. It will make your life easier, and it will even keep you alive in most situations, if you know how to use that gear. And that's another aspect of it too. Planning also incorporates training. If I don't use the gear, actually use the gear that I have, then I'm only hurting myself in the long run. If I've never set that tent up, sure, we can figure out how to set up a tent. But if I've never used my fire steel and started a fire, it's not a hard process, but if you've never done it before, it may take a few minutes, or it could be very difficult, especially in a windy situation, a wet, rainy situation. And those are the types of things we have to take into consideration, especially when gear is a big part of your plans. Gear is a big part of mine, but honestly, the biggest part of my plan are the skills that I've learned over the years, the things that I know how to do that I've developed. These are what's going to keep me alive. The gear is just going to help make it a little easier. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Planning to me is one of the most important aspects of prepping, because prepping without a plan is stockpiling. And that's good. I'm not knocking that, and that's great for a lot of people. But you need a plan to get out of the area, and a plan for what you're going to do when you get to that area. Are you just going to go out into the woods and set up a tent and stay there permanently, or are you got a time frame? Are you going to use that as basically a small post that you can explore outwards from and recon the area and see what's going on? So planning is extremely important. Have multiple plans to get out of the area. Have multiple plans for what you're going to do when you get there. To me, that's the most important aspect. Well, thanks a lot for watching. God bless. And for now, Serious Survivor, out.